Howdy folks, Chris McLean back with another episode of the show. And on the show today, I've got Susan from Pragmatic Digital. Next, business experience. Pragmatic Digital helps marketing, branding, and customer experience executives take advantage of the incredible opportunity that voice represents. Pragmatic Digital helps you focus on voice strategy that works before you dive into tactical voice apps, so your brand ends up on the winning side. Susan, thanks for being here. Excited to get into the wonderful world of voice.
Thanks for having me and excited to talk about it.
So what is the wonderful world of voice? When we say voice and when you're talking about the opportunity inside voice, what are we talking about?
So voice is a very big, broad term. And when we talk about voice, we talk about it from a capital V perspective, because if it's lowercase v, people realm into the world of voice talent, voice training, all of that fun stuff. So when we're talking about voice with a capital V, we're talking about any way that you can control a device using your voice. So that could be everything from the smart speakers like Alexa and Google Assistant that we know pretty well, all the way to things like your faucet, your phone, even things when we looked at CES last time it was in person, there were everything from meat thermometers to cars to gas pumps to thermostats. So there's a whole array of it. And when we talk about voice, we like to think about it in two subcategories underneath that. And there's voice as a product, which is those utilities, those timers, smart home devices, things like that. And then there's voice as part of a customer experience, which is where voice can help a brand build its relationship with customers in a really meaningful and deep way, especially now that at shelf is a different type of thing, now that on-premise had a different definition. We think of it that way, and that's a huge opportunity for how agencies can help their clients innovate.
Yeah, it's a super interesting space. You said more and more devices. There's more and more sensors in things now, and these things are becoming having voice recognition baked in, so I can and it does the thing that I want it to do. I think that the interesting thing is that it's starting to change, I guess, the taxonomy of things like search phrasing.
Yes.
As I speak slightly different than if I'm if I'm using voice search inside something like YouTube rather than typing how to fix car, I'm going to say, hey, how do I fix my car? So the language and the taxonomy, I guess from an advertising perspective, looking at how that comes back to SEO and key strings and keywords and that kind of thing. Is that sort of the space that you're operating in? And how does it? What is sort of the tactical stuff in terms of if I'm a marketing agency and I want to help a brand tap into this stuff? What does that start to look like?
Sure. So yes, at the crux of it in the beginning and sort of after folks stop, the gateway things are playing music, timers, asking about the weather, things like that. Then we start moving into asking questions. And there's some research that we've seen that has indicated that that's a primary place and a primary way that people are talking about it. Now we call it, from an industry perspective, we call it voice search, but it's really, when we talk to consumers and research, they're saying, I just use my voice, I just ask. And it does impact your SEO. And that is one of the things that we help with. And then the idea of instead of going with a keyword, you're going to start going with long tail phrases. You're going to start looking at featured snippets. And that's so that you can be found, so that when someone is asking a question using their voice, your content can be found and it can be served up. Now, we then move into other ways. And this all depends on what the goals of the clients are. If you want to have much more control about that audio experience, then you start looking at creating voice apps or even voice enabling your mobile experiences and things along those lines. And what that does is, again, it allows for that information seeking to happen where the search is either taking place within the app or is taking place within the web, or is taking place through the assistant. So that could be like through Google Assistant or Siri or Amazon Alexa. And so that what we do in our particular role is we help clients understand, where does it make the most sense? Because it's such a broad array, there are times where, if you want to be a QSR restaurant and you want to make your menu available. Well, does it make sense to create a whole standalone app that lives on the smart speakers, or should you be looking at how do you voice enable your mobile app? So we help guide through that, so that way then we find the right places to use voice, because voice doesn't fix everything. It does make a lot of things a lot easier. It's a lot more inclusive. So we try to navigate that so it becomes more than a shiny object, but becomes actually part of better customer experiences and better ecosystems.
Yeah, awesome. What is the prevalence of this stuff now? So as you sort of Alexa and Siri and these sort of voice, and Bixby and these sorts of assistants have been around a while now. They're becoming more and more commonplace. But say I'm fairly tech savvy, but I don't have an Alexa or a Google smart speaker or anything. What's the market use in this stuff? How many people are actually doing voice-based searches these days?
Sure. So where we live today is, I think back in 2018, PricewaterhouseCoopers did a research paper, and that was in the, I believe, just U.S. market, and about 97% of people in the 90s were aware of voice. So that's a pretty large number. We just did some other research and preliminary. I can't get into too deep of a detail, but again, that number is holding. What we're seeing now is that of that particular group, we're then looking in the 50s, 50% range of how many people are actually using voice. Because while some folks, to your point, they don't use the smart speaker, you still use this guy. And when we're using this guy, our smartphone, it's still voice enabled. You can still access the Google Assistant, or just through there's mobile apps again, where you can start to have what is kind of a conversation, or it's the beginnings of those conversations. So there is a lot of depth. Now, when we talk about smart speakers, there's about, I think last number I saw was about 90 million of them in home in the United States. And depending on what country you're in, whether you're in Europe, different parts of Europe, it might be the Google Assistant, it might be Amazon Alexa. Like up in the Netherlands, it was primarily, I believe, Google Assistant up until recently. And then the US has both of them. But then again, as I mentioned, you still have your smartphone enablement. So if you have Android devices and things like that, it starts to mushroom exponentially about the reach if you have a voice app or a voice experience.
Mm-hmm. And I guess there's also the aspect that a lot of search and targeting is happening on platforms like Facebook and ad retargeting. It's happening anyway, just because your phone is around and it's in the room and it's listening to what you're saying. And you'll sort of say something, and then that ad's getting served. So there is also that sort of hidden, invisible component of voice as well, right? Sort of, it's happening in the background without you actively saying, "Hey Siri, I want to go find a new car. Right. What's the closest car dealer?"
Yeah, absolutely.
About I must can serve that kind of ad anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of it, they'll say that they don't listen that much, at least with Facebook, but we know that we see that the changes come up and based on your search behavior. And that's where privacy comes a big play. And that's actually one of the not-for-profit organizations that we work with, which is an open source organization, part of the Linux Foundation, is called the Open Voice Network. And that's actually, we're working on asking those important questions right now about voice assistants and making it worthy of consumer trust. So that means, what does that mean by open standards? What does that mean from a privacy data management perspective, and making sure we're not running afoul of, the European privacy review boards and things like that. And that in the United States, we're also following CCPA. Those are questions we're asking now. When it comes to other digital places, I think those questions got asked after the fact, when we're now in this amazing time where we can say, wait, let's ask this question before we go too far, and make sure that we can be very deliberate with how we do things. And some of it does, I know that there's been recordings. A lot of things are anonymous so that the machine models can learn. When it comes to artificial intelligence and natural language processing, there is some of that listening, but there are now ways that you can delete that, and you can also then take more control. I think the important thing is education. and making folks feel that way. We know from some of this recent research that privacy is a concern. What's more important is making sure that you're transparent about, hey, here's how we're going to use that information if you are collecting it. And then also the guidance we often give is, why collect it unless you're going to use it? If you're not going to use it, collect the bare minimum of what you need to get the job done. And that just makes it so that you're being on the up and up, but it also ensures that people feel comfortable, because if we can give the value exchange for what we're asking for, then that comes into play. And that's what we've seen time and time again of folks, of course, are always concerned about their privacy. They're also concerned about their security. But how do we make sure that then we're giving enough value and we're giving enough trust to help build that? And that's, again, another opportunity if you're a brand of trust, because folks are looking for entertainment. Folks are looking up product information. They're looking up all of these pieces. You want to be there. So it's going to be a matter, though, about being a good digital citizen as you go through that.
Yeah, I think that trust and privacy thing's massive, and sort of an example of that we've seen with COVID and people having to start move into digital. So I guess older generations have had to set up digital banking. They've had to start pulling out the credit card, which before they didn't have that trust, right? A lot of new consumers have moved into the e-com space purely because they had to now exist, because they've done it. They've gone, oh, I pulled my card out. I didn't get scammed. I got a great service. My thing got delivered. It was really easy. Now I've got that trust built up, and now I'm willing to pull out my credit card and shop online. So we've seen that happen over the last 18 months in sort of a rapid shift. How do you position this for somebody that's not, why do I want to use voice, right? Why, if this doesn't make sense to me, what are the benefits to me as a consumer, as a human person interacting with my life and my stuff? Why would I want to use voice search as opposed to typing something in, doing my traditional Google style typing? So much better.
Yeah, there's a few reasons, and there's a few reasons why you start with search, but then you see what else it can do. From a consumer perspective, you have the ability to multitask. You don't have to stop and go over to your computer and type something in. You can be hands-free. You can also be eyes-free, which is really important. As when we look at indexing within parents, we look in indexing within even in auto and things like that. It's really important to not necessarily take your eyes off the road or what you're doing, so you can begin to activate and use your voice that way. There also is the whole challenge that goes away of literacy. You don't have to be able to spell. You don't have to be able to type. All you have to do is be able to speak. So for the first time in a very long time, this technology is learning how we want to engage, how we want to put the input, as opposed to previously where we've been looking and saying, okay, I hit this button, I hit this enter. If I'm doing a Boolean search, I put and in all capital letters. Going way back, this is where we have the opportunity to take away a lot of that friction. From a business perspective, part of it is there has been a little bit of wait and see. So there's a huge opportunity to be able to start to claim oceanfront property, so to speak, in the search space. Imagine if you knew what SEO was in 2000 and in the early 2000s, as opposed to having to wait for Google to come and make that happen. That's a huge opportunity that comes forward. It also allows you to be able to scale certain things, where you're able to scale customer service, you're able to have consistent messaging, and you're also able to begin to emote, because if you have audio branding and you've gone down the proper path of having that, you have a way of creating such a richer engagement than someone reading text that really helps then again make that emotional connection.
Yeah, actually, really interesting point. You sort of talk about hands-free, eyes-free. That's something I sort of hadn't necessarily considered, but that for certain businesses and certain industries, that must open up opportunity to speak to. Imagine sort of the sort of blind markets where they're traditionally having to use Braille for input and have specialized keyboards and specialized devices to input through text. Now, if they have that speech capability, they can search and get access the world, right? Access reading resources and access the internet and get quicker, faster access to what a lot, I guess, us able people body granted is to have that quick, speedy access. But that must be a really interesting space in opening up opportunities for marketing and support services in that sort of space.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also the language component. If you're able to, I don't know how many times I've worked on a website where we'll do, umpteen pages in American English, and then it's okay, we need a page of Spanish. Well, wait a minute. You're telling me that we can use a couple pages to summarize a language that actually is 25% longer in translation when I translate, wait a minute. And there's an opportunity here to be able to help those underserved markets and also expand the number of languages. So that way, then it again becomes a bit more of an equalizer, which is really exciting. And when we talk about storytelling and voice and tone, it becomes literally what the voice and tone are, which is a really exciting dynamic way of engaging and allowing them to come in. And the other part of it all is the user is asking for this information. Your audience is saying, you're in my home, I'm going to ask you this question. So you're actually invited. So rather than being in this disruptive, let me force my monologue on you, you're actually invited. So there's a whole other receptivity that comes with it as well.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, super interesting space. And so what sort of time this is normal? I mean, it's more normalized now. But when does this become the default? When does it is it 3 years, 5 years, 10 years where I'm not inputting through a keyboard anymore. It's so easy and the interfaces are up to speed where I guess the technology is capable of distinguishing when I'm asking for a search or when I'm talking on the phone in the background or when I'm on a podcast, right? When I'm here and I'm speaking into my microphone now, I don't want everything I'm saying to be going off and being searched, right? So there's that complexity as well. What's that sort of roadmap look like to you? Do you think is that a few years? Is that going to be the new normal, or is there always going to be a balance between?
I think there will be a balance. I think right now the search capabilities and being able to using what call wake words of what is that little front phrase that activates it so it doesn't pick up all your conversation. It's a little imperfect, but it gets better all the time. We live in that world today where certain basic queries and certain information seeking, all of that can be achieved already. Where we're getting more complex and starting to really look into things like biometrics of security based on that and pieces. That's something as we integrate that in, those integrations are going to be down the road a bit of a way. But there are things we can do now to optimize and create that will move us towards those bigger integrations that are probably 3 to 5 years down the road. But that also depends on how much business investment comes in. As we just found out overnight, behavior shifted for good or bad. And so it is being prepared to know. I've learned to not go too far in advance after the past 18 months. Because as you said, some people, I think with some of the stats I saw were people who 9% of people who had never ever made an online purchase before did, and then plan to do so. So there were a lot of new habits that happened. And so I think that we also living in a touchless world where people really are kind of like, I would prefer to do that without having to touch it. That may additionally accelerate some things. I know that there are some aspects of voice technology that accelerated, and there's some of it that slowed down a little of, well, wait, we need to sit back and make sure that we aren't doing as much R&D. We need to make sure that the core business is tended to, but there's always going to be that push for innovation.
Yeah, there's always a tendency with this exponential tech that it really becomes prolific when the interface, the user interface, is just super simple. And you kind of almost saw that when you take Google. The Google interface came out and it was just a search box, and it became very, very simple to use compared to some of the earlier search engines. Mobile phones, when the iPhone came out, it was a beautiful, simple to use, easy to understand interface, and that's when it became much more prevalent. So I think that's generally how this stuff becomes much more mainstream, is when the interface is super easy. And so, interesting point that touch-free aspect might be accelerated given the times that we're in, where people have that fear around touching surfaces, and particularly out in public. Can I call an elevator with my voice? That kind of thing. That becomes, can I, in the riffing here, when I'm crossing the street, instead of pushing the button to say, I'm ready to cross the street, can I say, I'm here, I'm ready to cross, and it'll recognize the voice, and that'll trigger that system. I think there's some pretty interesting stuff. There's more and more services and things get filled with sensors and microphones, which opens up a whole other level of, again, privacy and security. As an example, I know even my bank now, when I'm speaking to my bank, they're now asking for voice print. So saying, do you want to set up your unique voice print? And you sort of touched on that biometrics piece then. So instead of going to my bank and having to type in my code and word Chris McLean, and it recognizes that as like a fingerprint, right, as a voice print, and that gives me access to stuff. So this stuff is coming through, but it's there's as you say, a lot of privacy, a lot of, do I actually want to use this? Is it faster? They're pretty interesting, very, very, very interesting stuff coming through. What do you think that tipping point is? Is it the interface? Is it just, rather than having so many options, there's a couple of winners that come out? That can also happen as well, where instead of having 45 different test platforms, there's a couple that are really good, and those are the go-tos. What's sort of the tipping point, do you think, for this becoming more mainstream?
I think the tipping point is a couple places. Like you talked about with security and logins. What's really interesting, and there's a company I know out of Nebraska, we've talked quite a bit with them. There actually are some improvements or ways that your voice print can actually be more accurate and give you a higher probability, so you have better identification than even facial recognition, which is really exciting. It's a matter of then how do we store that so that that's safe and secure, and there are ways to do that as well. There's nuances. So there's that one whole side of it. Plus there's diagnostics from a medical perspective. There's a company out of Israel that's been doing things along the lines of being able to actually diagnose, or at least to suspect and begin to start the diagnostic path for COVID, for COPD and some other particular breathing impacting diseases. So that helps with a lot. Now, when it comes to how that works from a marketing and an agency and an operations standpoint, part of it is going to be better experiences. So we're going to have to start to make it, like you said, it's more than just the UI. It's actually going to be the design of, does it understand me? Does it do the things I want it to do? If I don't want to rock, and getting that comfort of helping folks go from the concept of, well, why would I want to use my voice to do that, to how did I live without this? I think those are going to be the simple things that we ask. There was a time we had to explain to people, and throughout my career, of the three big shifts that happened with first websites, then social, and then mobile, is going through that period of where we've had to explain to folks, here's how you use it, or here's what to look for, here's how to explore. You don't really think anything about, you just pop right into Google and you make your search, or you just type right in what is the brand name of the thing, and you're like, oh, I'm sure they have a website. We aren't quite there yet with voice. We're not very close at all of folks saying, oh, yep, I know I'm just going to do that. So we're still going through that phase of where we have to have, the good news is you're on the cutting edge and you're helping your customers in an easier way when you use voice properly. The bad news is, and it's not even the bad news, it's the rub to that, is you have to explain to them how to use it. And you need to do that not just in a voice type of siloed scenario. You have to do that in all of your marketing and your communications. So that's everything from when on hold, making sure that connected, hey, you can also check this out and look at our voice enabled mobile app, or go check out our Google Action or our Alexa skill. Being able to just kind of continually prompt people to go seek it out and use it. And then making sure that they understand why. So I think those are going to be the tipping points that make it where it becomes easy. It is interesting that we see that once a person starts to use voice and kind of starts to understand its value, they start using it. First, they start once. Back in 2018, it was like once a day made you a heavy user. Now it's multiple times a day. And the other thing too that's exciting about it is it's not just one age group. This is a technology that gets used by, of course, millennials, but also the older generations as well. And even in the 50 plus cohort, we're seeing it because it's actually a way of staying connected. It's also a way to allow someone to age in place, because it gives them some of that independence, and they have a way to connect. There's a lot of nursing, of home care groups that have their own closed networks that use these devices so that they can, again, either connect with family or connect at the nurse's station or do things like that. So there's a lot of ways that I think it's going to become ubiquitous only because it has so many applications. So I think it'll just come down to then when those applications are done well. And that's something that I think everyone in the voice community is continually working on doing. And there's a lot we can achieve already today from the standpoint of where the appetite of consumers are as far as seeking information, having that experience, and being able to turn that into something very rich with a good creative mind that's able to help, again, create that audio brand, take that content and make that into something that is digestible and part of that, appropriate for those conversational interfaces as opposed to reading.
Yeah, love it. It's amazing. It's amazing opportunity space. It's certainly something. It's a trend that's going to become much more mainstream. It's very, very much on that early stages of that exponential uptick, but it's exciting. These are the exciting times to step in and start exploring this stuff and seeing how it can work and how it can help brands ways to engage. So thank you so much for dropping by and sharing your wealth of knowledge in this space. It's you're obviously something that you love and you got massive expertise in it. It's really
And we were fortunate that we were able to kind of work through what we did, and like I said, saw it with web, saw it with social and mobile, and said, I'm not going to sit on the sidelines this time. So there's a lot still. It's still early days though, so it's not a place to be intimidated by. There are still good foundations and things along those lines where it applies. It's not nearly as close to Jarvis as a lot of people like to think.
Yeah. But soon, we're not Jarvis. If people want to come and find out more about you, find out more about how to use voice, where they can start to activate this stuff, where are some of the best places for people to get connected with you, Susan?
Sure, absolutely. Obviously, we have our website up there. And then on that bit.ly link, there's actually a couple of places. There's Twitter. The voice community is very active on Twitter, as am I, and I'm within that place. LinkedIn. We've also, my husband and I also have written a book called Voice Strategy, Creating Useful and Usable Experiences. A link to that is also in the accessed by the bit.ly. And that just is a very quick, easy read that talks about the point, a lot more into why voice is compelling and why it's a big deal. And then some processes and our own process for how we go about evaluating and figuring out where is voice fit, what's going to make sense, and what's going to basically give the value so that I'm not just serving my consumers, I'm also keeping my business objectives in mind.
Love it. Amazing stuff. Super, super cool growth area for people that are interested and fascinated by technology and what's coming next to start to dabble in and really get an understanding of this. Because as you say, this is something that's coming. It's going to start to impact all of our lives somehow, some way, particularly. They said in 20 years' time, you look back and go, look at it the same way as we're looking at mobile apps or websites or Google search. Certainly something that's coming through. So thank you so much for sharing deep insights. I hope everyone at home has got as much insight and excitement out of this as I have today. Thank you for dropping by, Susan. Appreciate you taking the time out, and appreciate everyone sitting at home and listening along. And hey, maybe down the line you'll be able to voice search some episodes on the podcast. So who knows where this is going? But thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Thanks so much for having me on. This was great.
Pleasure. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Catch you on the next.